Hello, everybody, and welcome to our very, very special Imagination Ghost Train episode today. And we're fascinated at AIME with unlikely connections, with ways of connecting with different spaces and places and different levels of consciousness. And we had a connection, an unlikely connection with a group called Q5 who do really groovy consulting and engaging with problem solving. And they reached out to us a couple of years ago when the pandemic kickstarted and said, hey, can we help you guys out with some problem solving? We said, yeah, that'd be great. And we got together and they had their way of thinking about things and we had our way of kind of trying to mash together different elements and create those unlikely connections. And when we thought about how we could launch our partnership to formally work together as we kind of move into this next phase, one of us suggested that maybe we should host an Imagination Ghost Train and have a conversation with some different people about strategy, about networks, about thinking. And so today, this is our take on what an Imagination Ghost Train is. Do we think imagination's a joke? No. Do we think it's serious to explore different parts of our psychology as we're tackling more linear ideas? Yes. And today, to kickstart us and get us going, we're going to get going with a 60-second challenge. So, Freddie, have we got you there?
I'm here.
Welcome to the show, Freddie. All right, the clock's about to start ticking and ready, set, go. What is a ghost?
It's a spirit of something that's not here anymore.
When were the first ghosts ever spotted?
Millions of years ago.
Who are you going to call?
Chris Tarrant.
Are ghosts friendly?
Some can be, some not so much.
What is your favourite lesson you have learned from a state which wasn't clear consciousness?
Be grateful for the things that happen and look at them from different perspectives.
What are dreams?
Connections from random parts of your brain and seeing them from a completely different perspective.
How much does it cost to make a dream?
Like 10 hours being awake.
How much is that?
Free.
Thanks for joining us, Freddie. All right, we're going to jump over to Janice. Janice, are you ready for the 60-second challenge?
I am indeed.
All right, let's get the clock started. Have you ever ridden a ghost train?
No, I'm not.
Who do you think would make a fantastic ghost?
Me, because I'm really friendly.
Ghost versus invisibility. What do you think would make a better superhero?
Oh, sorry, I didn't get that.
Whether there was a ghost or there was invisibility, what do you think would be the best superhero characteristic?
Best superhero characteristic, invisibility.
Where do dreams come from?
Very deep parts of your brain.
What's imagination?
Imagination is what you make it.
How do we use it?
you can use it, well, use your imagination.
Awesome. Thank you, Janice. Thanks for joining us. And that moves us into the next section of the show where we have a panel coming. And so for the panel, we're going to have one of our special professors come and join us. So that's going to be exciting. Take a moment to think about your own 60-second challenge during this short interlude of silence. Okay, let's start the panel. I'm Professor Hope, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. And I'm the Professor of Imagination at Imagination University. It's great to have you. I'm really keen to, just quickly before we get going, have we got Curious Carlos there?
Hello, everybody. I'm the Curious Cassowary. Sometimes I get really confused and call myself by different names. Today, I'm calling myself Confused Cassowary. I actually need time for my confusion. Confusion can be a cue that there's new territory to be explored or a fresh puzzle to be solved. If I ever start a punk band, which is not out of the question, I've already nailed the name, the Zone of Optimal Confusion. It's perfect on so many levels.
Welcome to our panel today. We're very lucky to have with us Christy and Errol, and we've got Susan, Vikesh, and we've got Karina joining us as well. Thank you all for joining us on the show. To get us going, I'd love, Vic, you were sort of part of this conversation pretty early before we got going. Really interested in your take on what is a network.
Network. Hey, everyone. Hey, Jack. Thanks for having us, and thanks for having me. A network is simply a connection of two things together. They can be anything.
Karina, how have we designed our networks to date? What are some examples of networks that you see, and how effective do you think they are?
Yes, networks. Okay. When I think of networks, I think about what makes things work, how we can make things work and network in the right way. It's like taking the right direction and networking and finding the right tribes and people that are going to help make things, the magic happen. So networks are something we can all find, even though we might be in certain very different places, but it's very important we find the right sort of networks and connections. And that goes with people and our own personal lives and working lives. So,
Errol,
yeah.
Do we have a sense of where the networks that we have today, say, for example, like capital networks and the framework that moves money around, do you have a sense as to where that started and who was involved in the design of some of the networks we've inherited that position so much value today?
I think networks, from my perspective of how thinking works, I think we as humans network, our brains network. It's done through theory of mind and so on. So we would have begun that before we had the technology that then expanded it. And I think that's this kind of globalization and the internet and the technology. It's for me just an extension of what the brain was always doing. It's just another pathway or another avenue. It would have had to network in a village, being the boundaries. There was a fence, nothing more. We had telephones, and I think our capacity to cross distances just has simply made the network bigger or more complex. And the iterations when things come and go that quickly on a network can cause a lot of complexity, even chaos. And I think social media is perhaps extension of. But yeah, the capital networks are there to move money. And blockchains are a really cool new network idea that haven't been around.
Yeah, I think one of the fascinating things about blockchains and thinking about networks, I suppose, is who's in the room working on the design. If you think about many of the nations that are running today around the world, a lot of them are echoes, if not still part of a colonial structure from France and from Britain. And, Australia, where I've done a lot of my research as a professor of imagination, our head office of Imagination Universities here, Australia still has a queen. And when you think about the design, a lot of those systems went out intentionally to remove people from the network. In Australia, we had apartheid created here. There's slavery that's been introduced across the Americas. There's lots of instances where people from outside, different genders or different colours, were not ever designed to be in the network. And I think, Vic, don't you think that's potentially a bit of a challenge? I'll open it up to the panel for the rest of you to jump in after Vic's response as well.
Yeah, it's a massive challenge. I don't know. I think when there's an element of networks which are like completely natural, and networks aren't just between people, right? It's with connection between any living thing and even non-living things and ideas and even concepts, right? So
Oh, we just lost you on that thread, but that might have been tactical, Vic, for you to go on mute because you opened up some space there. But I think the natural laws that's such an interesting idea, isn't it, Susan, that we have networks that have been manufactured, and then we have a number of natural networks. And I wonder what we can learn from potentially bringing them together. Thank you again for joining us today, Susan. What do you think?
You're most welcome. Happy to be here. Well, there is this sense of biomimicry, right? That the natural world, trees network with one another. They actually communicate with one another through their roots, and we understand those systems. Ants, insects, birds all have networks. We can learn from their organizing principles, and given that humans are part of living systems, I think all of these living organisms have naturally evolved, creating networks of understanding, creating networks for surviving and thriving. The thing that happened with humans, I believe, is that networks began to be closed systems rather than open systems. And the opportunity now, as we've gotten smarter and seen what's going on and see what humans' impact is on the natural world for which we owe our survival, is to go back and start thinking about merging the man-made and the natural networks together and opening them up and recognizing the degree to which humans and other living things and are dependent on one another. And so if you think about the need for increasing diversity, the natural world shows us that diversity is imperative for survival. We need to be more inclusionary and less exclusionary in terms of who we network with, how we network, how those systems are maintained and sustained.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one, which I think we'll drop back into as we come back to the panel around when we think about the network and what's designed. One of the questions becomes, what do we value and how do we value it? Which I think a number of you in your work and what you do are fascinating nodes into major networks. When you're designing strategy sessions, you can sit there and say, well, is the return just money? Or is there a return on relations? And what does that look like as a measurement system? And are there alternate systems we can explore for the health and well-being of our organizations? Where do Indigenous systems thinking come into play? And when we start to map with complexity, which is, I got to interview Dr. Jane Goodall last year, name drop, and Jane said to me, the thing is, Hope, the biggest challenges that we face, they require the biggest possible imagination for us. We need to look at the biggest possible systems view, because the moment we tweak anything, we have a series of unintended consequences, whether it's seaweed farms onto any other human intervention. So we've got to learn, and it's intelligent to learn from all of the different sources. And I just think to date, we haven't tapped into the biggest source of human intelligence, which is outside the margins. So that's a really exciting opportunity in the future with these problems that lay ahead. Okay, before we jump into the next section, I'm just going to go downstairs and see if there's anyone else on this coast train. Hang on a sec. Thumper, are you there?
I'm here. If you don't know where you're going, any road can take you there.
Zorro? Do we have you there, Zorro? Maybe we'll see if Jiminy Cricket's around the corner.
Well, after all, how do we know that 2 and 2 make 4, or that the force of gravity works, or that the past is unchangeable? If both the past and the external world exist only in the mind, and the mind itself is controllable, what then?
Now that's a question with networking. Let's follow Jiminy Cricket's lead and open it up to the panel. We've heard from all of you. Take that question. What is the mind?
It's fascinating. I love that. I think that Jiminy Cricket, yeah, I think that it's so true. We, you know, if we keep looking behind or keep looking forward, you know, how can we really be in the present? We talk about the importance of being present and dealing with what's happening now. It's a much more productive way. You know, people procrastinate and sabotage situations because they're so nervous of what's going to happen in the future or what's happened in the past, and those stories we tell ourselves, but they're all created in our own heads. You know, what's happened, you know, what's happened, and how we see different situations is very different than anybody else. You know, it's we all have a different lens. So I think it's really important to practice ways that we can hone in on what we can do in this present moment and not get caught up on those things that have happened, because they can really cause great damage, you know. So you know, I think and the future, same goes with that. You know, a lot of people are kind of really fearing what's coming down the road. So we need to be a lot more aware and tap into how we can work together and kind of work on yourself and be more aware of controlling that mindset, and rather than being creative, obviously, and but controlling away a more positive, productive way as well. So
yeah, it's a rich set of knowledge. I keep going, Vic, go for it.
Yeah, and just to build on that, Karina, I think like the mind is a way to interpret. It's like a channel, but it's just one channel. But then you also touched on this idea of, you know, inspiration and this ability to create and a spark. And I think the mind has some of that as well to life, which I think is really important, because the systems and the networks that we have, they have a momentum behind them and need to be, well, aware of how they've been set up and what's driving them, which is not obvious, right? I don't think it's obvious at all. And I think we have networks that aren't connected and not even aware of each other. So I think there's what we would call like structural holes and big gaps between these networks. So one is just like understanding where we are and what's shaping it, and then secondly, being intentional about wanting to change it, which requires sometimes a small grain of sand type of disruption and sometimes big, heavy machinery as well. And I think the mind has the capacity to fathom all of that and to do all of that, which I think is cool.
Glitch, have you got any thoughts?
Hello?
Glitch,
Hello.
any thoughts? Yes, hello, sorry.
Have you got me?
Hello?
Hello. Yeah, I think there's two ways of crossing the divide between Fantasia and the human world. When Fantasians are cruelly dragged across it, it's the wrong way. When humans, children of men, come to our world of their own free will, that's the right way. Every human has been here, has learnt something that could only be learnt here, and returned to his own world a changed person. Because he'd seen you creatures in your true form, he was able to see his own world and his fellow humans with new eyes. Where he'd only seen dull, everyday reality, he now discovered wonders and mystery.
Kirsty, what do you find joy in as you're thinking about economic design through a different frame? What do you think are the most exciting heat spots for us as we look towards potentially either new systems or sending nodes back into the network that enliven dated systems?
I think there's something in kind of gently helping people be a little bit uncomfortable for a while, because they're really, like, if you bring networks and systems together, you're really getting different perspectives, and there is going to be this period where people are uncomfortable or people are only seeing it from their own perspective. So I think the challenge is trying to find experiences that actually put people into other people's shoes. But some of the stuff that's really excited me, particularly in the Indigenous policy space I've worked in, is just entrepreneurialism is entrepreneurialism, and it's a worldwide thing. And so it's just, I've really loved seeing Indigenous entrepreneurs take it to big entrepreneurs, the big end of town, and show them where creativity and imagination's at, and really exceed expectations on that front. So yeah, I think in short, be prepared to be uncomfortable, be prepared to listen, walk in other people's shoes to truly understand, to sort of try and bring the networks together. And to facilitate that is just to ask some challenging questions from time to time that are gentle. You know, you don't want to alienate people.
I think we might have Wendy the Warty Witch there. You done that, Wendy?
Hi everyone, Wendy the Warty Witch here. Don't touch me, otherwise you might get a wart off me too. But why I'm a witch is I think if human beings had genuine courage, they'd wear their costumes every day of the year, not just on Halloween. Wouldn't life be more interesting that way? And now that I think about it, why don't they? Who made the rule that everyone has to dress like sheep 364 days of the year? Think of all the people you'd meet if you were in the costume every day. People would be much easier to talk to, like talking to dogs.
Dad, can I get on this show now? Is that okay? It feels like it's quite serious to let you jump on. You're a pretty young kid. Come on, man, give me a shot. All right. Hey, everybody, I'm Lion. It's great to see you. My dad, Professor Hope, has been reading lots and lots of books to me since I was a little kid. And I've always been a little bit frustrated because they are boring me. There's so many children's books of people like, oh, talk to the child through this formula that sells some sort of amount of books through some sort of strange, bizarro curricula formula. And it's always usually put together by publishers who are quite old and they don't laugh. And then I get sometimes like 1 in 100 books. I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you. Oh man, Chrissy Zombat, you there?
Hello. Standing at the bottom of Osmond's tree, Wendy closed her eyes and tried to imagine the stars, the moon, and the sun. Wendy tried to picture Osmond and all the other birds lighting up the sky, colors exploding everywhere. She knew she had to make her way to Delilah if she was to fight for Osmond's dream.
Okay, so we're getting towards the end of the show. Thank you, everyone, for taking your time and being a part of this ghost train. Open it up now for our panel. Have we got any questions that we want to ask each other? Vic, Kirsty, Errol, Susan, Karina, are there any questions we want to ask each other? And Errol, I'd love to ask you one question quickly before we just sort of open up to more of a relational conversation. Wisdom. Explain.
Yeah. So I think we accumulate knowledge, and we don't accumulate knowledge as something we know. We call it intuition in some cases. And we define intuition as the stuff you think you know that works. You don't quite know it. It's kind of like there, it works for you, but it isn't like knowledge. And so what we say is if you take intuition and you go and do some investigation or acquire some knowledge, acquire some learning, you turn intuition into knowledge. And that means you actually have something that you can kind of define, you can tell somebody about with relative ease. The next stage is you go and take that knowledge, you go practice with it. You run around and use it, and you talk to people about it, and you find, and what you do is you find out where that knowledge works and doesn't work. So that's like a boundary of knowledge. It's like a thing with it where it won't work outside the boundary, but it'll work inside the boundary. And what we call knowing the boundaries of knowledge is wisdom. So that's kind of now that we didn't make that up or invent it. It is kind of a structural understanding in developmental learning. As to how
Errol, can I ask one question there? Because
yeah.
I have been up trying to write this book with my dad, who's been like, he's been trying to shadow write it for a professor of ours. Professor Asterix is working on a book called on hoodie economics, and then he's helping write it for this guy who helped found AIME, and then it's all a bit convoluted. But one of the things they've been looking at with economics is like one of the premises or promises of capitalism is that human beings have limitless desires. So how does it work to have limitless desires and then have an edge of knowledge?
True economics is about humans having capitalism is about humans having limitless desires. It's really permission to have them, which we didn't kind of have them before capitalism. We didn't have permission to have them. So capitalism said, go and have them, and it doesn't matter who you harm along the way. You can see I'm not really a favorite of capitalism.
Yes.
So I think, I don't think capitalism looks for knowledge. It looks for purpose, and that purpose can be dark or not so dark.
And when we get to the edge of knowledge, then what?
Oh, I don't think there's an edge. I think at some point in time, our edge is what we can't understand. That just means it can't be knowledge because we didn't get it. We didn't understand it. But I don't know that there's an edge because there's always imagination. If you run out of knowledge, you can just make some stuff up. It's quite easy.
Mm-hmm.
And who'd know the difference half the time?
Beautiful. Thank you for taking a moment to take us into that space. Opening up now for the last little bit. Let's make this relational and just let it emerge. So for the five of you, you can take the stage.
I'm glad you mentioned that about the creative knowledge and the difference, because I think that it's just, when we look, we think we can all agree to where we are now, that, what we've done is controlled education, controlled our young people for too long. And the knowledge we're teaching them is not setting them up for the future that's theirs. So really it's a case of, creative freedom and, in preparing children for the world that they are facing is a crucially important time, So one thing I have discovered over the last couple of years, I think we might all agree that COVID has, opened us up these conversations and allowed us to be able to reimagine education, because my God, it needs to be changed. We're looking at, as far as I'm concerned, a system that's not fit for purpose, in Ireland here, I just, look at so many young people that are struggling with all sorts of mental health conditions, and it's around the world, and it's like we're continuing down this pathway because we're controlled by the whole capitalism, the whole fear of changing things, and if we don't change things, if we don't find ways to do this, well, then we really failed this generation and not allow them to be the creative thinkers that they need to be right now. So it is crucially important that we nurture the imagination and the creative freedom for these kids to be able to create and tell their own story and reimagine what their lives could be look like, So I think that it's when we talk about education, I always see a red flag, because I just think, we're not doing it right. We need to do so much more, So anyway, that's my take on education, It's how things are being done. But yeah, so I'm sure you all have your own views, but it's one of those situations that I hope we can change,
Yeah,
very soon.
It's our obsession at AIME is imagination. We think it's the beginning of all human thought, and if we can codify it, that we actually can teach it, and then we got ourselves a ball game. We think it's like a muscle that you can grow it, and you can utilize it. You can go into imaginative places, and it is freedom whether you're a kid who is stuck outside the margins, or you're stuck in a refugee camp, or you're in a classroom that doesn't work for you. You can go and leave that place inside your mind, and that is the ultimate emancipation, because no one can ever put chains around your mind. Now, the system may not keep up in the physical world, but the other beautiful opportunity that we're also excited about is we have this thing called the internet, which has the ability to rewire pathways. And there is a potential for us to get in there and design that in ways that can influence the real world. And I think to the cryptocurrency designs, or some of these new economic designs that are being built, we got to make sure we're accelerating intelligence from outside the margin back into the rooms of some of these design centers, to make sure that we don't design with the errors and the flaws and just a lack of understanding of participation from across the intelligence spectrum of human life, and then more system-wide life. We're about to wrap it up. Has anyone got any other final thoughts? A couple of light topics today on this ghost train.
I've got a question for everyone, which is, where have we seen really diverse networks being formed between organizations in a purposeful?
You just knocked your sound off, Rakesh. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? I was just.
That's it. Great. Yeah. Got you.
I was just asking for examples about where organizations have created really diverse networks, like where they've been quite intentional about it and where they've done that well.
Sound is gone again.
Yeah, so where are networks being designed to anti-club or to unpick some of the stuff that we're working on? What are the levers that we're looking at where we're seeing networks activated in maybe unlikely fashions that are creating different clubs of and perhaps where is it organic and where is it relational? Where is it sort of emerging with beautiful energy? And have we seen any examples that we love from the panel? And maybe that can be our final thought. And before we go there, Granny Peaches?
Yes, Siri. What I would really like to say is make sure you do good recklessly, not with a little bit of spirit, but with all of it. Do it recklessly. Don't hold back on doing good.
Laura, are you there?
Yeah, I got a little thing that I wanted to say, something I wrote once. Each of us is born with a box of matches inside us, but we can't strike them all by ourselves. We need oxygen and a candle to help. If one doesn't find out in time what will set off these matches, the box of matches dampens and not a single match will ever be lighted.
Karina, Vikesh, Errol, Susan, and Kirsty, if you want to just round out with any final thoughts, and then we'll go to close on the show. Thank you all for joining us today.
Got a thought. I think we live in a world where we notice objects before the spaces between them, right? And so if one does that, you can flip an object in a space between. So let's take imagination as an example. What if we looked at it in reverse? What if we flipped it and said, we're born with far more of it than we'll ever use, and we should stop switching it off? Because I don't know that we need to learn it. It isn't something we learn. It's an integral process from the neuroscience. It's an integral process in the functioning of the brain. In fact, just to live in the next minute, we have to imagine what might happen next. Otherwise, we won't be ready. So it's an utterly constant part of every second moment of our brain is to imagine what's going to happen next so we could be prepared for it. Otherwise, we're done. And it's the same thing with learning. We create ideas. We should just stop extinguishing them. And there's so much of our world that can be flipped. Take the color red. It isn't really red, like the hat on your head. It's the absence of all the other colors that would make it white. Now that sounds a bit weird and back to front, but do you see it has another property that until we can see that, until we can see the spaces between objects, until we can see the fact that our brains have a lot more capacity than we use, I just think we should be reversing some of our thinking a bit to try and get to some stuff. Anyway.
Yeah.
I think talking about that and looking at the spaces in between, one of the things about the spaces in between is that it's space. Generally, we talk about accumulating knowledge we want to know. The spaces in between are the wonderful spaces where we not know. Those are we don't know. And in that space of not knowing, now you can really bring imagination in, and rather than saying knowledge, that in-between space is where imagination lies, because it's that quantum leap of any number of streams are possible in that space. and that space can contain multiple possibilities. I teach my students best possibilities before best practices. I'm always asking them to expand their imagination, to open the aperture of their understanding and what they see. It's like a camera aperture, right? The wider you make the lens, the more you can take in. The more you take in, the more you see. The more you see, now you can build on that and go, what are all the possibilities here? And then you can follow one and say, oh, that's very interesting, or you can follow another. If we stay with possibilities rather than solely accumulating knowledge and knowing, we constrain ourselves. This is what we do to children in education. We stop telling them that cows can be purple with yellow stripes and have wings on their backs and fly at certain times of the year. And we indulge it for a while until they're about 3, but when they go to school, we no longer tolerate cows that are purple with yellow dots that may have wings that at certain times of the year can fly. Now they're cows that produce milk and they do something. To always lead with mind negates how we lead with gut feeling, that intuition, and heart. And you cannot lead, we cannot invent without operating from heart, head, and hand.
Wow. It's powerful, Susan. Thanks for that. Really, it's just, you know, our minds and our creativity is unlimited. We've been conditioned for so long to, I suppose, yes, to kind of stay within those constraints of what we're led to believe, which have been lies. You know, there's, you know, I've got to what's lies. You know, I think we need to look beyond that and, you know, really nurture that creativity and really value and find it the most precious gift that we all have. If we don't have imagination and creativity and that ability to dream beyond our wildest dreams, what do we have? You know, we all need to really, really, really nurture this. It's a crucial time that we do this. So yes, I just wanted to finish with that one. And thank you for opening my mind up to a very creative morning. imaginative morning. So it's been fun. So thanks, everybody.
Kirsty or Rick, you got any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Final thoughts from me, if you can hear me at the moment. It's pretty short, but it's just being aware of the bubbles that we find ourselves in and having the courage to create a connection across those bubbles or do something different and challenge ourselves. And that's kind of me speaking to myself a little bit as well. So that's my final thought. Thanks.
Well, thank you, everybody, for taking the time to be a part of this. And, you know, when Dad was talking earlier and thinking about his work with imagination, I think you're so right, Errol. It's there. I think NASA did a study not too long ago that 97% of 5-year-olds have a genius level imagination, 3% of 35-year-olds. Riddle me that. I think we know some of the causal things that build into that. And it's a superpower. You're so right, it's there. And so much of Indigenous systems thinking sort of lands us with the gifts we've already taken on, with all of this knowledge that's been passed on generation after generation. For us in Australia, or for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, 60,000 plus years of knowledge that's been passed on. So you're entering generational intelligence that's been navigated for 60,000 plus years, plus everything else that's happened on this little blue dot of ours. So I think it's a fascinating moment. I love the thinking about the space between and how you can go and move and open up different things just by moving around with different space. There's all these opportunities that we can work with if we just change the frame a little bit of where we are. One thing we'd love to do is we think that there is an opportunity and a responsibility with the gang at Q5, and we think you guys have such a potential to plug into some of the major players and major thinkers in organizations around the world. And that's why we are excited about this partnership, because imagination isn't a joke, it's critical. Diverse thinking isn't a joke, it's critical. The space between is what is going to get us to tomorrow. And too many of our systems box us before we even start an idea. And you're so right, Errol, that they tear down ideas very, very quickly, and critique becomes fashionable and critique becomes currency. That's not what this partnership is about. We're going to work together globally to be going into different businesses and change the way businesses work, to see if we can value relations, we can value our imagination, we can value connection without transaction having to be central to that outcome. And in doing that, we think we can do what Susan was talking about and look at all of the systems around us for holistic design. And that's what we're going to have to do. This moment in time commands it from us. And for my generation, for kids like us, we need you to do it because we're not in control yet. We need you to model and be mentors and role model the way to do business differently with what you know. The knowledge is there. And so we're really excited about being an example to Vic's question of unlikely connections, of connecting in different ways, of changing the way the network can move and how knowledge and information can move. So thank you all for joining us today. We're also love following up and making sure that talk isn't cheap. So for all of our guests, we're going to invite you to be mentors and residents with one of our leadership team and maybe kick it for an hour a month over the course of a 3-month period. And let's keep learning and growing together and fostering these relations and going deep. So thank you everybody for being a part of the show, and thanks to all our ghosts, and okay, bye. Well done. That was amazing.